What if the most dangerous enemy wasn't across the battlefield, but sitting right next to you, typing your secrets? What I'm about to tell you ain't some dime store novel. This is real deal, heart-pounding espionage straight out of the Cold War, and it nearly brought down one of America's most brilliant minds. Picture this. It's the late 1980s. Tensions are thicker than a New York City smog cloud. Reagan's talking tough, Gorbachev's got his poker face on, and in the background, the shadows are playing for keeps. In this high-stakes game, we've got Silas Thorne, a billionaire tech mogul. Think Tony Stark, but with more steel in his spine and less flesh. This dude built an empire out of silicon and sheer guts, pioneering defense tech that kept America a step ahead. He's sharp, ruthless, a grade-A genius, and he trusts nobody. Except for one person. His secretary. Elara Petrova. She was an absolute dynamo. Brains, beauty, efficiency personified. She ran his life, his office, practically his whole damn world, with surgical precision. Flawless. Indispensable. A total rock star. And that, my friends, was the biggest lie of all. Because Elara Petrova? She was a ghost in the machine, a silent assassin with a smile, a phantom woven into the very fabric of American power. She wasn't just working for him. She was playing him like a fiddle, gathering secrets, whispering them back behind the Iron Curtain. And for years, Thorne had no clue. Zero. Zip. Nada. But then, the whisper started. Not from external threats, not from rival companies. From within. Critical details, top secret intel. It was vanishing into thin air, only to resurface in the most chilling places. And slowly, agonizingly, Thorne's unwavering trust in Elara began to crack. He knew, deep in his gut, that something was rotten in Denmark. But how do you catch a shadow? How do you expose a master spy who lives and breathes your every move? How do you hunt the person who knows you better than you know yourself? What Thorne uncovered next wasn't just a betrayal. It was a psychological battlefield, a chess game played with lives, secrets, and the very future of a nation. And the shocking truth of how he finally caught her? It's crazier than anything Hollywood could dream up. So strap in, because this story isn't just about catching a spy, it's about the terrifying realization that sometimes the greatest threats aren't lurking in the darkness, but are bathed in the brightest light, operating right under your nose. How does a man who trusts absolutely no one, a man whose entire career is built on anticipating threats, fall completely blind to the deadliest one sitting right across his desk? Silas Thorne was a force of nature. A self-made man, born in the dust of the Rust Belt, who clawed his way to the top of the burgeoning tech industry. He wasn't just building computers. He was crafting the future, designing advanced encryption, guidance systems, and cutting-edge surveillance technology that put him squarely in the crosshairs of every major intelligence agency on the planet, both friendly and hostile. His company, Thorne Dynamics, wasn't just a business. It was a national asset, constantly on the bleeding edge, pushing boundaries that often intersected with state secrets. Because of this, Thorne lived in a world of perpetual paranoia. Every handshake was scrutinized, every new hire vetted to an inch of their life. He had an uncanny knack for spotting a rat, a sixth sense for deception. His security protocols were legendary, his personal life a fortress. He genuinely believed he was impenetrable. Then came Elara Petrova. She walked into his life like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Her resume was flawless. Degrees from prestigious European universities, glowing recommendations from multinational corporations, a mastery of half a dozen languages. She was elegant, sophisticated, and possessed an almost supernatural efficiency. In a sea of competent, ambitious people, Elara didn't just stand out. She eclipsed them all. Thorne, ever the pragmatist, had been initially skeptical. He put her through the ringer. Psychological evaluations, background checks that went deeper than the Mariana Trench, interviews designed to break the strongest wills. Elara sailed through every single one, unflappable, confident, always with that serene, intelligent smile. She spoke with a slight, unplaceable accent, exotic, charming, but never enough to pinpoint. She explained it away as growing up in a diplomat family, moving frequently. It made sense. She started as an executive assistant, but within months, she was indispensable. She anticipated his needs before he even knew he had them. She organized his chaotic schedule with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. She drafted correspondence that perfectly captured his voice, often improving on his own thoughts. She remembered every detail, every preference, every obscure fact he'd ever mentioned in passing. When Thorne was immersed in complex code or high-level negotiations, Elara was the steady hand, the calm voice, the silent guardian of his time and focus. She was more than a secretary. She was his second brain, his operational core. People around the office joked that she was the real boss, and Thorne would just grunt, a rare half-smile playing on his lips. He relied on her heavily. She handled his classified documents, managed his secure communications, even knew the passcodes to his most sensitive systems, not because he handed them over, but because she'd learned them through observation, through proximity, through sheer necessity of her role. She was, in every sense, his gatekeeper, his confidant. But beneath the perfect veneer, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of doubt began to sprout. It wasn't about a specific action or a missed detail. It was something far more insidious. Thorne, for all his genius, was a creature of habit. He had his quirks, his pet peeves, his often unspoken preferences. Everyone else in his orbit, no matter how long they'd worked for him, would occasionally trip up, make a minor misstep, or require clarification. But not Elara. Never Elara. She was too perfect. It wasn't a flaw, it was an absence of flaws. She never had an off day. Never seemed truly flustered. She always knew the right thing to say, the exact solution to every problem. It was like she was reading from a script, but a script so perfectly written, so fluidly delivered, that it felt completely natural. To anyone else, this would be the hallmark of an exceptional employee. To Thorne, the man who built his empire by looking for the tiniest imperfections in code and logic, it felt synthetic. He tried to dismiss it, chalk it up to his own inherent distrust, his constant need to find fault. But the feeling lingered, a subtle itch he couldn't scratch. A whisper in the back of his mind, saying, "This isn't right. No one is this flawless." It was a gut feeling, a cold premonition that he couldn't rationalize, but also couldn't ignore. This wasn't the first time his gut had saved him, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The seed of suspicion wasn't planted by an act of espionage, but by an anomaly in her perfection, a subtle imbalance in the carefully constructed facade that only a mind as analytical as Thorne's could detect. Her flaw was her utter lack of any discernible flaw. When leaks started to bleed from the most secure corners of his empire, how could Thorne even begin to suspect the one person he'd allowed closest to his most vital secrets? What makes a man who trusted no one start doubting the one person he depended on most? The whispers intensified. Thorne Dynamics was neck-deep in Project Nightwatch, a revolutionary satellite defense system that could detect and neutralize incoming ballistic missiles before they even left the launch pad. This wasn't just a project, it was the ultimate deterrent, the ace up America's sleeve, and its security was paramount. Every detail was guarded like Fort Knox. Access was on a need-to-know basis, compartmentalized beyond belief. But then, the leaks began. They weren't grand, catastrophic breaches, at least not initially. They were subtle. A competitor suddenly had a similar design concept for a seemingly unrelated component. A minor detail about Nightwatch's operational parameters appeared in an obscure foreign technical journal, disguised as theoretical research. A subtle shift in an adversary's counterintelligence efforts suggested they knew something was coming, even if they didn't know what. Thorne, usually a calm strategist, felt a cold dread creeping in. These weren't random hacks. This was targeted. This was surgical. And the information being compromised was exactly the kind of highly technical, highly classified data that only a handful of senior engineers and Thorne himself had access to. And, of course, Elara. He initiated an internal investigation, discreetly at first. He brought in his top security chief, a former CIA operative named Miller, a man as humorless as he was effective. Miller swept the offices for bugs, tightened digital security, ran background checks again on everyone with access. Nothing. Zip. Zero. Every system was clean. Every employee cleared. The phantom leaks continued, like water slowly dripping from a hidden fissure. Frustration simmered. Thorne felt like he was chasing ghosts. He looked at Elara, observing her with a newfound, chilling detachment. She continued to work with her characteristic grace, her efficiency unwavering. She handled the mounting internal panic, the increased security, the hushed conversations, with an almost unnerving calm. She even offered suggestions for improving security protocols, which were, of course, brilliant and practical. This was the ultimate mind game. The more Thorne looked, the less he found. The less he found, the more he doubted himself. Was he becoming paranoid? Was his gut instinct finally failing him? He started to play small, psychological games. He would, accidentally, leave a sensitive document open on his desk, noting how quickly Elara would discreetly close it or place it in a secure folder. He'd mention a fabricated detail about Nightwatch in a casual conversation, watching her eyes for any flicker of recognition, any tell. She was a master poker player. Nothing. Her responses were always perfectly neutral, perfectly appropriate. One day, during a late-night work session, Thorne mentioned a seemingly innocuous detail about his personal life, a peculiar, almost whimsical interest he had developed in early 20th century Russian avant-garde art. It was a lie, a planted seed. Elara paused, just for a fraction of a second, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Then, a wistful smile. "Ah, Kandinsky," she murmured. "A true visionary. His early works, particularly the composition series. Bold. Revolutionary." Her knowledge was surprisingly deep, her tone genuine. Thorne felt a jolt. He had chosen Kandinsky precisely because it was an obscure, specialized interest, one he knew he certainly didn't have. And Elara, who was supposed to be a meticulous secretary focused solely on his business, knew it intimately. Too intimately. He also noticed other, almost humanizing details that, paradoxically, made her seem more suspicious to him. A slip of the tongue where she used a highly specific, almost archaic Russian idiom, quickly corrected with a charming laugh and an apology for her childhood influence. A momentary flash of something fiercely protective in her eyes, when another employee carelessly handled a seemingly insignificant foreign stamp on an incoming diplomatic pouch. These were tiny cracks in the flawless facade, so small they were invisible to anyone but Thorne, whose mind was now a finely tuned radar for anomalies. He realized then, the leaks weren't just data leaving the building. They were designed to keep him guessing, to create just enough chaos to make him paranoid, but never enough to directly implicate her. She was a master sculptor of suspicion, diverting it everywhere but herself. He wasn't dealing with a simple thief. He was dealing with an artist of deception. The leaks weren't a direct betrayal designed to point a finger. They were a carefully orchestrated psychological operation, subtly engineered to cause suspicion and internal strife, but strategically ambiguous enough to keep Thorne looking everywhere but at his perfect, indispensable secretary, forcing him to rely on his own gut, which was now screaming. The small, humanizing flaws he observed weren't flaws at all. They were carefully placed details, creating a natural persona that, to his analytical mind, only heightened her artificiality. When standard security measures, and even your own cunning psychological games fail, how do you bait a trap for a ghost who knows every move you're about to make? Thorne knew he was in deep. The internal investigations, the sweeps, the counter-surveillance, it was all failing because Elara was always one step ahead. He realized he was playing by her rules, reacting to her moves. This wasn't working. He needed to flip the script. He had to become the hunter, and she, unknowingly, the hunted. He called his new strategy Operation Echo. The premise was simple, yet incredibly complex. He would create a unique echo for every piece of sensitive information he wanted to test. These weren't actual classified documents. They were carefully crafted fictions, intricate deceptions designed to look like the real thing. He started small. He would draft internal memos for Project Nightwatch with specific, unique typos, an uncommon misspelling of a technical term, a slightly altered sequence of numbers, a peculiar turn of phrase that only appeared in his version of a document. He'd then ask Elara to type up these drafts or file them, ensuring she was the only one who had direct contact with that specific, subtly flawed version. Then he waited. Days bled into weeks. Nothing. The typos never appeared in any subsequent leaks. The slightly altered numbers never surfaced. Elara remained flawless, correcting the errors in his drafts without even commenting, seamlessly integrating them into the official, correct versions. She was either incredibly thorough, or she was smarter than he gave her credit for, correcting his fictions, rendering his echoes silent. Thorne felt a cold prickle of respect, mingled with utter terror. He was dealing with a mind as sharp as his own, perhaps even sharper. He needed to escalate. He decided to create a fabricated, critical vulnerability. This was a dangerous game. If discovered by an actual adversary, it could have dire consequences. But he was desperate. He drafted a highly classified report detailing a supposed backdoor in Nightwatch's primary encryption algorithm. A fatal flaw, seemingly accidental, that could bring the whole system crashing down. He wrote it in his distinct style, peppered it with technical jargon only he and a few select engineers would understand, and embedded a unique, almost poetic code phrase that only appeared in this specific draft. He left the report on his desk, clearly marked, "Top secret, eyes only," knowing Elara would eventually come across it. He made sure she was the only other person to lay eyes on this particular version. He even discussed it vaguely with her, feigning concern, asking her to ensure it was filed away securely after he reviewed it. It was a masterful performance. His heart pounded in his chest for days. He kept his usual routine, but inside, every nerve ending was screaming. He checked intelligence reports, monitored obscure channels, watched for any sign of this vulnerability appearing in the wild. And then it happened. Not the way he expected. A small, insignificant leak. A snippet of code, seemingly random, appeared in a private chat group frequented by Eastern Bloc hackers. It wasn't the backdoor vulnerability he planted. It wasn't even directly related to Nightwatch. It was a tiny, seemingly harmless string of numbers and letters from an older, archive project file. A project from years ago, one that had been deemed obsolete and decommissioned. Thorne was baffled. He hadn't given Elara that specific archive file. He hadn't even looked at it himself in years. He ran the string through his internal database. The file was so old, so buried, so utterly irrelevant to current operations that hardly anyone remembered it. The only way someone could have gotten it was by actively digging for it, going far beyond their immediate duties, venturing into the deepest, darkest corners of the company's digital archives. He traced the origins of the archive file. It had only ever been stored on a specific offline server, isolated from the main network. Access required physical presence in a secured server room and specific, high-level credentials Elara did not officially possess. But then, he remembered, years ago, during a major system overhaul, he had granted her temporary, elevated access to all archive files to help him consolidate and purge old data. A temporary override for a project she had overseen with her usual unmatched efficiency. The access had been revoked immediately afterward. Or so he thought. He checked the old logs. The revocation had happened. But what if she had copied something during that window? Something she kept. Something she knew would never be missed. His mind raced. The vulnerability he'd planted hadn't leaked. But something else entirely did. Something she had seemingly gone out of her way to find. Something old, something cold, something that had been waiting for the perfect moment to be reactivated. It was an indirect message. A subtle flex. She was showing him that she didn't need his current secrets. She had her own arsenal, and she was watching him watch her. The fabricated intel didn't leak, because Elara wasn't a mere conduit. She was an analyst, a strategist. She saw through his trap and subtly signaled back, leaking irrelevant, obscure data from a source she alone had accessed years prior, demonstrating her own initiative and deep historical access, effectively telling him, "I know you're looking, and I have secrets you don't even know exist." If she saw through every trap, ignored every planted seed, and outmaneuvered every security measure, what was the one fatal flaw even a master spy couldn't hide from a genius billionaire? The one personal thread she couldn't cut? Thorne slammed his fist on his desk, the quiet thud echoing in his cavernous office. He was losing. Elara wasn't just good. She was a legend in the making, a ghost in the machine, playing chess when he thought he was playing checkers. He was utterly defeated by her sheer, impenetrable perfection. The more he tried to expose her, the more she vanished into her own flawless efficiency. He was chasing shadows, and she was the puppeteer. He realized he'd been attacking the problem like a technologist, a security expert. He was looking for digital fingerprints, data trails, logical inconsistencies. But Elara wasn't just data. She was human. A deeply flawed, uniquely motivated human being hiding behind an illusion of perfection. He needed a different angle. He needed to find the person behind the persona. He began to look at her not as an adversary in a game of espionage, but as a complex system. He reviewed every detail he knew about her personal life, every casual comment, every seemingly innocuous habit. He pulled up old surveillance footage from the office, looking for subtle tells. He sifted through public records, anything he could get his hands on, not for dirt, but for patterns. Elara had a pristine, almost Spartan personal life. No scandalous affairs, no lavish spending, no obvious vices. She lived in a modest, but impeccably maintained apartment. Her weekends were spent in quiet pursuits, classical music concerts, art gallery visits, long walks in Central Park. She subscribed to literary journals, attended philosophy lectures. It all painted a picture of cultured, reserved elegance. A perfect cover. But then, Thorne remembered the Kandinsky comment, and the small, almost unnoticeable collection of antique Russian lacquered boxes on a shelf in her office, pieces that were far more valuable and historically specific than simple decorative items. He had initially dismissed them as a personal touch, a nod to her supposed European upbringing. Now they screamed. He focused on the lacquered boxes. They weren't just Russian, they were Fedoskino miniatures, a highly specific craft from a particular region of Russia, known for its intricate paintings, often depicting folk tales, historical events, or scenes from Russian literature. It was an incredibly niche interest. She had several, all seemingly authentic, some quite rare. He then started cross-referencing this specific interest with everything he knew about Soviet espionage during the Cold War. He spent sleepless nights diving into declassified documents, biographies of known agents, studies on psychological profiling of spies. He wasn't looking for a direct link. He was looking for a method. And then, it hit him, like a lightning bolt. During the height of the Cold War, particularly in the years when traditional communication methods were heavily monitored, Soviet intelligence had famously employed cutouts and dead drops that often blended seamlessly into everyday life. They used everything from hollowed-out rocks to seemingly innocuous objects in public places. But the most insidious were often personal items, things that could be carried, exchanged, or simply displayed without drawing suspicion. What if the lacquered boxes weren't just decoration? What if they were more than just a hobby? What if they were messages? He remembered a particularly intricate box she had acquired about a year ago, around the same time the Nightwatch project had ramped up. It depicted a scene from an obscure Russian fairy tale, a hero slaying a dragon. He recalled Elara mentioning, in passing, that she was particularly proud of this piece. She'd even placed it prominently on her desk, rotating its position subtly from time to time. Thorne started to examine photographs he'd taken of her office over the years, innocuous snaps, mostly for archival purposes. He zoomed in on the boxes. He noticed the minute changes in their arrangement, the slight shifts in which box was open or closed, which side faced outward. To anyone else, it was simply an aesthetic rearrangement. To Thorne, it was a pattern, a code, the specific depiction on that dragon-slaying box. Thorne recalled an old, obscure Soviet spy manual, declassified years ago, which detailed a system of visual cues, a subtle language based on popular cultural references, designed for agents to communicate in plain sight. Fairy tales, folk art, classical music pieces, they all had hidden meanings, preassigned signals for actions, confirmations, or warnings. The dragon-slaying hero. What did that mean? Victory? An obstacle overcome? A target eliminated? He couldn't be sure yet. But the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. Her flaw wasn't a flaw at all. It was a carefully cultivated cover, so specific, so niche, that it seemed utterly harmless. It was her personal life, a seemingly innocent passion, used as a conduit for espionage, hidden in plain sight. He had found his thread. Not a digital one, but a human one. A thread woven into the fabric of her identity, her hobbies, her chosen aesthetic. This wasn't about technology anymore. It was about human psychology. About the art of deception, and the very subtle, almost poetic language of spies. Thorne stared at his collection of office photos, at the changing positions of the lacquered boxes. The Cold War wasn't just fought with missiles and tanks. It was fought with whispers, with codes, and with the most dangerous weapons of all, the minds of people like Elara Petrova. And now, he had a chance, a desperate, dangerous chance, to use her own language against her. He saw a terrifying beauty in the intricate deception, a sinister genius that mirrored his own. He knew he had to be just as cunning, just as ruthless. He devised a new, audacious plan, one that would expose her completely, using her own carefully constructed world against her. It was a gamble that could cost him everything, his company, his reputation, maybe even his life. But he had no choice. He was going to set a trap so personal, so deeply rooted in her own world, that she wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. The game was about to reach its final, terrifying climax. If her whole life was a meticulously crafted lie, how could Thorne construct a truth so undeniable, so deeply personal, that even a master spy would be unable to resist revealing her true colors? Thorne was done playing whack-a-mole with digital phantoms. He needed a physical, undeniable manifestation of her betrayal. He needed to bait a trap so specific, so deeply woven into her personal life, that she couldn't help but step into it. The Fedoskino boxes. That was the key. Her Achilles heel, hidden in plain sight. He dove headfirst into the world of Russian miniature art. He read everything, studied every technique, analyzed every known communication method Soviet agents had ever used with such artifacts. He learned about the subtle shifts in design, the coded patterns, the dead drop messages often embedded in art pieces. It was a language, and he was determined to become fluent. His plan was audacious, risky, and brilliant. He would create his own Fedoskino box. Not a fake, but a carefully constructed piece designed to carry a coded message that only Elara and her handlers would understand. He found a renowned artisan, discreetly commissioning a new lacquered box. The design was to be specific, a scene depicting a lone wolf howling at a crescent moon, with a tiny, almost imperceptible detail, a single, faded red star in the corner of the moon. The wolf, he knew from his research, often symbolized a lone operative, a signal of independence or a specific mission. The crescent moon could signify a timing, a phase, or a specific target. The faded red star? That was his personal touch, his direct question to the Soviet GRU, Main Intelligence Directorate. Are you there? Do you see this? But the box itself was just the delivery mechanism. The real message wasn't painted on it, it was within it. Thorne carefully hollowed out a minuscule cavity in the base of the box, just large enough for a microdot. On that microdot, he placed a single, fabricated piece of intel related to Project Nightwatch. It wasn't the backdoor vulnerability he tried before. This was something far more urgent and provocative. It was a false timeline for the imminent deployment of a critical Nightwatch component, indicating an aggressive, accelerated schedule. The kind of intel that would trigger an immediate, high-priority response from Moscow. He didn't just want her to see the box. He wanted her to act. Now, the hard part, getting the box into her possession without raising suspicion. He couldn't just give her a new, expensive Fedoskino box out of the blue. So, he fabricated a story. A fictitious client gift. He told Elara he'd received it from a reclusive European industrialist after closing a major deal, an industrialist known for his eccentric tastes and appreciation for rare art. He even had his security chief, Miller, set up a fake courier delivery for the box, complete with international customs tags and a fabricated letter of authenticity. He left the box, wrapped in elegant paper, on her desk one morning, a casual note attached. Elara, a token of appreciation from Mr. K. Quite exquisite, wouldn't you say? Thought you'd appreciate it. He watched her from his office door, pretending to review reports. She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers tracing the smooth lacquer, her eyes widening slightly as she saw the wolf and moon motif. He saw that subtle, almost imperceptible flinch as her gaze lingered on the faded red star. A tiny, involuntary intake of breath. He felt a surge of triumph, cold and hard. She saw it. She understood it. But the real test was yet to come. Her next move. He and Miller had wired her office like a Christmas tree. Not with obvious bugs, but with directional microphones hidden in pins, cameras disguised as smoke detectors, and even a tiny infrared sensor focused solely on her desk, tracking the precise orientation of her lacquered boxes. They had meticulously documented the position of every one of her existing pieces. The next few days were agonizing. Elara placed the new gift box on her desk, right next to her other treasured pieces. She admired it, rearranged her collection around it. But she didn't appear to do anything with it. No hurried phone calls. No clandestine meetings. She continued her duties, with the same unblemished professionalism. Thorne started to doubt. Had he miscalculated? Had she seen through his ruse yet again? Was she simply too good? Then, on the third morning, he noticed it. A subtle change. The new Wolf and Moon box was not just sitting there. It was slightly rotated, its single faded red star now facing precisely north-northeast. And next to it, her prized dragon-slaying hero box, the one she'd been so proud of, was now subtly propped open, just a fraction of an inch. He raced to his internal database, cross-referencing with his Soviet spycraft research. North-northeast orientation, combined with an open lid on the dragon-slaying box, it was a confirmation signal. A receipt, a coded response that said, "Message received," initiating action, obstacle being engaged. The fabricated intel from the microdot had been received. And Elara, the perfect shadow, had just unwittingly confirmed she was working with the very entity Thorne believed her to be. Elara, unable to resist the urgency of the coded message and the specific cultural context of the Fedoskino box, subtly altered the arrangement of her collection. This seemingly innocuous act, observed through Thorne's meticulously placed surveillance, confirmed his theory. She had received and acknowledged his planted message, solidifying her role as a spy directly communicating with Soviet intelligence. With the bait taken, how does Thorne move from mere suspicion to ironclad proof? And how does he ensure she can't escape the net he's meticulously woven around her? The subtle shift in the boxes was the confirmation Thorne needed, but it wasn't proof that would stand up in court or convince a skeptical intelligence agency. He needed a smoking gun, a direct link, something that screamed, "She's a Soviet spy," without a shred of ambiguity. He and Miller went into overdrive. Thorne laid out his theory for Miller, detailing the Fedoskino codes, the microdot, the planned response. Miller, initially skeptical, was quickly convinced by Thorne's meticulous research and the damning implications of the subtle box movements. "This ain't no amateur hour, Silas," Miller muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This broad's playing for keeps." Their objective was clear: capture Elara transmitting the fabricated Nightwatch deployment intel. The previous leaks were too diffuse, too deniable. This time, the information was unique to the microdot, unique to the Wolf and Moon box. If it appeared anywhere else, especially in Soviet hands, it would be undeniable proof. They knew Elara wouldn't just pick up the phone. Her methods would be far more sophisticated, far more clandestine. They focused their surveillance on two main areas: her apartment and her established routines. Miller dispatched a small, highly trained team of former black ops specialists, disguised as utility workers and street vendors, to set up covert audio and visual surveillance around her apartment building. They were looking for any unusual activity, any patterns that deviated from her carefully constructed normal. Thorne, meanwhile, theorized her communication method. Spies often use burst transmissions, short, encrypted radio signals sent at prearranged times to avoid detection. Or, even more subtly, they might use dead drops, physically transferring information in public places. Given her artistic leanings, Thorne suspected the latter, perhaps even involving another art piece. He had a hunch about her trips to the park. Elara often took her lunch break, rain or shine, for a walk in Central Park. She claimed it was for fresh air and perspective, but Thorne now saw it as a potential window for her operations. He had Miller's team discreetly shadow her. For 2 days, nothing. Just peaceful walks, a cup of coffee from a street cart, a moment spent gazing at the pigeons. Then, on the third day after the box was placed, her routine changed. Instead of just walking, she lingered near a specific statue, an equestrian monument of a forgotten general. She stopped, seemingly to admire it, but her hand subtly brushed against the base of the statue. Nothing was exchanged, no packages left. It was too quick, too innocuous. But Thorne's team had planted a high-resolution camera inside a fake bird feeder overlooking that specific spot. They reviewed the footage frame by frame. When Elara's hand touched the base, a tiny, almost invisible magnetic capsule, no bigger than a tic-tac, adhered to her palm. She palmed it expertly, her motion flowing. Completely natural. Then, moments later, as she passed a park bench occupied by a seemingly engrossed newspaper reader, her hand again brushed, this time against the bench, leaving the capsule behind. The newspaper reader barely stirred. This was it. A classic brush pass, dead drop. Miller's team moved in, not on Elara, but on the park bench. They recovered the magnetic capsule. Inside, incredibly, was a tightly rolled piece of rice paper. On it, written in microscopic script, was the exact fabricated Nightwatch deployment timeline Thorne had planted on the microdot inside the Fedoskino box. Not only that, but there was also an additional, handwritten note, in Cyrillic script, with an urgent addendum about the operational implications of the accelerated timeline. A tactical analysis Elara had clearly performed herself. The second half of the operation involved the newspaper reader. Miller's team, disguised, followed him from the park. He led them directly to a Soviet consulate car, discreetly parked several blocks away, where he was met by a man with diplomatic plates. The exchange was swift, professional, undeniable. A handover to Soviet intelligence. Thorne had done it. He had manufactured a piece of highly sensitive, fake intelligence, planted it in a unique, coded way, watched her respond through her arcane communication method, and then intercepted the physical transfer of that intel directly to an enemy operative. The chain of evidence was airtight. The silence in Thorne's office, after seeing the evidence, was deafening. The proof was chilling. Elara Petrova wasn't just a turncoat. She was a highly trained, deeply embedded agent, using her unparalleled access to funnel America's most vital secrets straight to the Kremlin. The years of trust, the shared jokes, the quiet understanding, it was all a sophisticated performance, a carefully constructed facade designed to lull him into complacency. Thorne felt a profound sense of violation, a personal betrayal that cut deeper than any corporate espionage ever could. He wasn't just catching a spy. He was catching a ghost that had lived in his house, eaten at his table, and stolen his soul piece by piece. Thorne and Miller used advanced surveillance to track Elara's response to the planted intel. They witnessed her execute a flawless, brush pass, dead drop in Central Park, transferring the fabricated Nightwatch deployment timeline, along with her own strategic analysis, directly to a Soviet operative. The intercepted message provided irrefutable physical and digital proof of her espionage, leaving no room for doubt. After years of flawless deception and devastating betrayal, what happens when the architect of the lie finally stands exposed before the man she so expertly fooled? How do you confront a phantom? The morning of the confrontation was eerily normal. Elara arrived promptly at 8 a.m., a steaming cup of Earl Grey in hand, a serene smile on her face. She organized Thorne's schedule, sifted through emails, and even reminded him about his anniversary gift for his wife, a detail she remembered from a casual comment months ago. The perfection was suffocating. Thorne sat at his desk, watching her, a cold knot in his stomach. He had Miller and a team of FBI agents waiting in an adjacent, soundproof conference room, ready to move in the instant he gave the signal. The office was swept clean, all usual recording devices disabled, replaced by hidden, FBI-grade equipment. No escape. No deniability. "Elara," he began, his voice calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. "Could you come into my office for a moment? I have something I need to discuss privately." She walked in, her movements fluid and graceful, closing the door behind her. She stood before his desk, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her head tilted slightly, an expectant, polite expression on her face. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. How may I assist you?" Thorne leaned back in his chair, his gaze unblinking. "Elara," he said again, letting her name hang in the air. "I've been doing some personal investigating, and I've found some interesting things." Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker. "Oh, about what, sir?" He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the new Wolf and Moon Fedoskino box, placing it squarely on his desk between them. Her eyes, for the barest fraction of a second, widened. A minute crack in the flawless facade. He pressed on. "This box, Elara, it's quite beautiful, isn't it? A lone wolf, a crescent moon, and a faded red star. A very specific message, wouldn't you say?" Her composure was extraordinary. "It is exquisite, Mr. Thorne. As I told you when you gave it to me, I truly appreciate the gesture. I believe it's a commentary on individualism within larger society, perhaps a yearning for freedom." Thorne cut her off, his voice hardening slightly. "Don't insult my intelligence, Elara. You know exactly what that star signifies. You know what the wolf means to your employers." He pushed a button on his desk. A hidden monitor behind him flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear, frame-by-frame replay of her subtle interaction with her boxes, the precise north-northeast rotation, the barely open lid of the dragon-slaying hero. "This, Elara," he continued, his voice like chipped ice, "was your confirmation, your acknowledgement that you'd received the coded message." He then cued the next video. The bird feeder footage. Her hand brushing the base of the statue. The tiny capsule adhering. Her passing the park bench. The recovery. And finally, the microscript on rice paper, magnified on the screen, showing the fabricated Night Watch deployment schedule and her handwritten Cyrillic analysis. "And this," Thorne said, his voice now a low growl, "is the proof. The undeniable, irrefutable proof that you, Elara Petrova, my indispensable, trusted secretary, are a Soviet GRU agent. A spy." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the ventilation system. Elara stood utterly still, her eyes fixed on the screen, then slowly, deliberately she turned her gaze back to Thorne. The serene mask finally crumbled. Not into tears or panic, but into something far more chilling, a look of cold, almost analytical resignation. And then a flicker of respect. "You're very good, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual charming lilt, revealing a harder, more pronounced Russian accent. "Better than I gave you credit for. You saw what no one else did." "I learned your language, Elara," Thorne replied, his own weariness finally showing. "I learned your patterns. I learned how deeply you had woven yourself into my life, into this company, into this country's defense." She didn't deny it. "It was my duty," she stated, her eyes now devoid of emotion. "To my homeland. To the cause." "And the cost?" Thorne pressed. "The betrayal? The damage you could have caused?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "In war, Mr. Thorne, there are always casualties. You would understand that. You build weapons that destroy cities. I merely gather information to protect mine." The sheer audacity, the cold logic, sent a shiver down Thorne's spine. She truly believed in her mission. She wasn't a mercenary, she was a zealot. A ghost in the machine, fully dedicated. "The FBI is outside, Elara," Thorne said, his voice flat. "Your game is over." She closed her eyes briefly, a sigh escaping her lips. "I know," she whispered. "I suppose I always knew this day would come. But to be caught by you, that, I confess, is a surprise." She opened her eyes, and for the first time, a genuine, albeit faint, smile touched her lips. "Well played, Mr. Thorne. Very well played." He gave the signal. The door burst open, and Miller, flanked by 2 FBI agents, stormed into the room. Elara didn't resist. She simply turned, her head held high, and extended her wrists, offering them for the cuffs. As they led her away, Thorne watched her go, a profound emptiness settling over him. He had won. He had caught the spy. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the years of deception, the chilling intimacy of the betrayal. He had looked into the eyes of a true enemy, one who had worn the face of his closest confidant, and seen a reflection of his own ruthless intellect, twisted to another purpose. The Cold War, he realized, wasn't just a clash of ideologies. It was a silent, personal battle fought in the most unexpected of places, leaving scars no one else would ever see. Confronted with Thorne's meticulously gathered evidence, from the coded Fedoskino box to the undeniable surveillance footage of her dead drop, Elara Petrova's carefully constructed facade shattered. She acknowledged Thorne's superior skill, admitting her role as a GRU agent and justifying her betrayal with chilling conviction, revealing the extent of her ideological commitment and the personal cost of the silent war she had been waging. The story of Silas Thorne and Elara Petrova isn't just a relic of the Cold War. It's a stark reminder that the battle for information, for technological supremacy, and for national security is an ongoing, evolving chess match. Today, the methods are different, the technology more advanced, but the stakes are just as high, and the human element of deception remains terrifyingly constant. We live in an age where the lines between friend and foe are blurred, where digital ghosts operate with impunity, and where the most dangerous enemies might not be across borders, but operating in the very systems we trust.